Hello beautiful people, I'm RaishPhoenix, and in today's video I will be showing you guys how I completed this piece. If you'd like to see, just keep watching. So I do want to say briefly that if you guys are interested in seeing the line work and how I laid down the flat colors, I do have that video exclusively linked or available to my patrons. So on my Patreon, I have it in the description box below, and also it'll be at the end of this video. If you guys are interested in seeing kind of more behind the scenes of what I do, more progress shots, and just learning more about my process, that's the place to be. So for this drawing, I'm starting off with the basic flat colors, as I said before. At first, I'm just focusing on blocking in different highlights and shadows. I'd like to say that I started mostly with just like the mid-tone range, so not the harsh shadows, but the ones that are just very subtle, things to bring either features on the face forward or back, depending on the hue or shadow or value that I'm adding. And at first I like to focus on putting down shapes. So after I added kind of like the mid-tone highlights and shadows, that's when I started to dive a little bit deeper into the deeper shadows and kind of the brighter highlights, working in the hair and also other areas of the skin. For the areas where I knew I wanted to push the lighting, that was where I wasn't too hesitant on adding a gradient effect, which is what I use an airbrush tool for. I didn't go in with the gradient tool, I just applied a gradient over the bottom of specific areas, like on the lower half of her chest. I don't know, I just found it easier to do that as opposed to potentially altering other spots if I would have went in with a gradient layer, and I just kept it as a normal setting layer. I didn't do an overlay or anything. So this was a point where I started to make an attempt to figure out how I wanted to blend everything out. At first I was going in with a blending tool, but the issue that I have with the blending tool is that it kind of just, which in a way is kind of like, okay, duh, but like it kind of just pushes the color around. It's not really doing much to help me kind of smoothly transition into the shade next to it, which is what I wanted without having to do the work of like layering different opacity layers next to each other. So I ended up eventually realizing that I can just use the airbrush tool with a combination of pen pressure to really help blend the colors that are next to each other, and I kind of do a back and forth of using the airbrush tool and the eraser tool set to soft. With my layers, you guys see I have layers for days, so with each kind of different value in all the areas of this piece, really, I have it on separate layers, so I don't have to really worry about erasing the color next to it, because the color next to it is on another layer. But I'd say if you work with it, and if you're at a point where you want to try whatever it is that I'm doing, you know, I'd say that if you have everything on one layer, you can definitely still just go in with the airbrush tool and just use a color dropper, picker, or the thing to see the color you have next to the one you're trying to blend out, and just go in between those colors to help blend it out. But I definitely figured out now that, you know, the airbrush tool is going to give me the best look, so to speak, that I'm going for. I'd say also figuring out the areas where I was intentionally going to leave with a sharper shadow or a sharper edge as opposed to softer edges. That's something I'm trying to be more conscious of. So as I was going in and blending everything out with the airbrush, I was trying to be more intentional about, okay, this area needs to be blended out, but if this area isn't, you know, this adds to the detail and the depth or the visual, I don't know, excitement of this piece. So just trying new things that I usually don't. Like, this was definitely the piece for that, because like I said, Clip Studio Paint is still like a relatively new program to me. I'm still learning how to use it, but at the same time, as an artist, I'm definitely in this area with my art where I'm learning so much. Like in previous videos, I've spoken to you guys about how I'm learning more about value and color palettes, and even diving into lighting now, especially lighting within this piece. So just giving myself an opportunity to experiment, try new things, work with color palettes that I usually don't. Like, this was definitely that piece to do that with. Also figuring out which brush to do the technique, like the highlighting technique I'm doing in the hair right now, figuring out which brush to use for that. Like, you guys are seeing me open the brushes over and over again, because I don't know, like, what's tricky for me sometimes is when I know how I want something to look, but I just don't know which brush to use for it, because I'll get different brushes and they look awesome, but it's like, it doesn't, I don't know, like the preview picture of what the brush is supposed to do looks awesome, but then when I start using it, I'm like, girl, that look a little bit different. Like, I don't know. So what I had to do was just like a lot of trial and error of just figuring out what brush to use to get the type of look that I was going for, because sometimes the brush, like the edges are fine, but then there's a grain that I don't want, or it blends, but it's just not blending with a soft edge. So it's a lot of trial and error. I'm sure you guys have experienced it yourself, but this was another area in which I had to get through the trial and error of while working on this piece. Another thing that I was considering was giving this a kind of like that dusty effect in the lower right corner, kind of to just mimic the original photo. But then I realized in the end that the lighting in this already played such a big part to just like the way this piece is, in the sense of like that is what stands out the most, you know. And I felt like the grainy texture, even though I wanted to bring that in from the reference photo, I felt like it was too distracting. It wasn't necessary. So you guys just saw me experiment with it briefly, but in the end I was just like, nah girl, you don't need it. The lighting is doing what it's supposed to do. Another habit that I picked up with in my process is every now and then I will save a JPEG of my file, and then as you guys are seeing in the bottom left corner, I will just look at it in grayscale. This helps a lot with just seeing the values, because especially for myself as an artist who loves to work with bold saturated colors, they'll look bright, but then once you look at it in a grayscale, you'll realize that it's actually very muted like the other colors in like the value range of it. So just taking the time to look at my piece consistently in grayscale has helped a lot with improving my sense of value and knowing what to fix or change or alter within my piece to make it stand out more in particular areas. You guys are seeing me go a lot into the hue, saturation, luminosity adjuster, because I have this habit of wanting to use a specific color, and then when I put it down I realized that it either went too crazy, like I went into a different hue that I didn't need to, or the color just isn't the way I envisioned it. So just putting like an obnoxious, like that one right there, putting down an obnoxious like large swatch of color just next to the areas that are more mid-tone and shadows, and then adjusting it helps me to kind of see how it's going to fit more into the piece. I like to do this, or this has definitely helped a lot with my pieces recently, because I could sit there being like going back to the color wheel, putting down a color and being like, is this it? No. Is this it? No. But I can just put this color down like a swatch and adjust it within the hue or saturation or luminosity, and then be like, okay, like this is the value, but maybe I need to change the hue or the saturation. So this has been an easy way for me to get the color that I envisioned, as opposed to just sitting there for 20 minutes going to the color wheel and just being like, nah, this ain't it. One of the things I also found myself experimenting with within this piece that I've never done before was adding, how do I describe it? So you guys see how I have the highlight in the hair. So I just added a gradient or an airbrush within that lighting on the hair to add a gradient effect. I hope that makes sense. So pretty much I already have one color down, but what I do is I add another layer, but then I clip it to the original one so that when I add down or put down a color, it's only within the area where I already have marked. So just adding a gradient within my highlights or shadows or wherever has been like something I've never tried before, but I love so much because it adds more dimension to the piece, and it allows you to either, like I said before, push forward or make other areas of the piece to fall back into the background. And this, I don't know, I feel like when I look at my work, like this finished piece, it kind of looks shiny. I don't know how to describe that. Like it pops, you know? And it's like, I just love bold saturated colors, and figuring out this little trick to do was like, I want to do this more, you know? Even with the nails, just going in with a more like paint splatter airbrush and adding that, I haven't really done anything like that in my previous pieces, so just doing that and giving the nails like this kind of glittery look, like chef's kiss, like I loved adding that so much, and I'm so glad that I gave myself the opportunity to experiment, because I definitely get caught up in this area feeling like I want things to be a particular way, but as I worked on this piece, I just allowed myself to listen to it, like just look at it for what it is, because at times I get caught up in this habit of like altering different things because I wanted it to match what I had envisioned in my head, but from listening to my art and just going with the flow, like allowing it to be what it's evolving into versus what it was in my head, has been such like a game changer for me when it comes to finishing my work. You guys are seeing me do it again, so I'm just like, I added just like an airbrush of yellow within the highlight or brightest highlight in the eye, so that really helped bring the eyes forward and allow it to pop. I also realized that this was going to be like a great way for me to bring that color from behind her back into like the center of this piece. And another thing I've spoken on in previous videos is that I want to experiment more with changing the color of the line work. So with this one, I realized that I didn't want to change all the lines because I felt like the black just, I loved it. I loved the way the black was looking against all the other colors. So instead, I decided to just change like a few of the outer colors, like of her hair and her top, just to help add to like this pop moment of this piece, and also just altering the color of the frames of her glasses was just like a subtle hint of magic, you know, that I really enjoyed adding. And the hand, as you guys are seeing, was kind of one of the last areas that I worked on in this piece. After I had worked on everywhere else, I felt like the hand only needed very subtle highlights and shadows because I didn't want it to kind of take away from the other areas, because the hand is already pretty, like it takes up, like even though I think just like this hand position, you know, kind of already stands out like on its own. So having her hand like that, I felt like it only needed some subtle highlights and shadows. It didn't need any stark things to kind of take away from her face and her hair. And here is the completed piece. Thank you so much for watching. Bless up, and until next time, sending out much peace, love, and enlightenment. Bye guys.